What do you think about Ange Postecoglou going to Tottenham Hotspur? Is that a possibility? I think obviously anything would wait until after the treble had been completed.
I'm an admirer of his. I was an admirer of his when he first came through the door. There was a lot of reticence about who and what he'd managed, because ultimately, if you look at his back catalogue before he landed in Celtic, he didn't produce, big hits in terms of the size and scale of the clubs that he'd been involved with. I spent some time listening and talking to Gordon Strachan, who raved about him and said, wait and see what he does when he gets to Celtic. One of the first games that Celtic played, myself and Jim were up at the Old Firm derby in Ibrox, in the first game that they actually lost to Rangers on. And I've been nothing but impressed with him since that point. I think he's a very capable football manager. I think often with Antipodeans, you get this culture of an ability to engage and deliver and concentrate the minds of their charges. So I'm not surprised he's been successful at Celtic. Now, stepping from Celtic into Tottenham, do I think he would improve Tottenham? Yes. Do I think he would square the circle of getting them to the holy grail of being able to deliver something? I'm not sure, because it's a big departure from managing in one hemisphere of the world, landing in Celtic and running yourself into a two-tier football league, and not being overly competitive in Europe, where the standard of the European competition will be up there with the standard of the Premier League, and they didn't excel Celtic in that space. But I think he's well worth proper scrutiny and consideration. Whether Spurs are doing that, don't know, can't speak to that. But I wouldn't sit there and go, whoa, hang on a second, no, where are you going? You're shopping in Poundland, you need to be shopping somewhere else. No, I think he's a proper football manager that is more than capable of taking the next step, which will inevitably be a step that he takes at some point, to the Premier League. You saw his reaction after the game. You saw his addressing of the fans. It doesn't look or sound like he's going anywhere.
But this would be just a sort of stop down the ladder, wouldn't it? Because they ruled off Nagelsmann. They ruled out Enrique.
You say that, but
they ruled out Slot.
But you
and
say
now
that.
They've come to Ange Postecoglou.
But you say that. Now, you've got to take all of those conversations in isolation. You've got to look at the Arne Slot one and look at the reality of what might have happened there, and how the manager may have gamed the system to leverage a better contract with Feyenoord, because at this moment in time he's developing his own coaching.
Wow, that's quite amazing, though, isn't it? To sit there and think, actually, do you know what? I'd rather work at Feyenoord with a better.
Well, do you know what?
I'm not making excuses for Daniel or Tottenham
rather
than go to Tottenham.
Well, no,
that's playing in the biggest league in the world.
That's you characterising that. Not everyone has to be Graham Potter and jump out of a very good job into one that's going to be very difficult. Not everyone has to take the opportunities like Marco Silva leaving Watford and going into Everton and finding himself out of a job in 18 months with a reputation damage because it probably was the wrong move.
What would you do?
I would look at it in all of its rounds and decide, first of all, if you go to Tottenham Hotspur, what are you going to be managing? You're going to be managing a Premier League side, whether you like it or you're not. You're going to be asked to compete at the top end of the table. You're going to be given a certain amount of resources, probably significantly more than you're being given in Holland. So with that in mind, I would take a view on backing myself. But I would also want to understand what it looks like. What does success look like to the owner?
Does it not worry that all these managers have sort of not been interested in taking the Tottenham job? Would that not suggest that they're not happy about the running of the football club?
Well, it doesn't worry me because I'm not a Tottenham fan.
But should it worry Tottenham fans?
Well, insofar as that these managers and the way that we are characterising the outcome is that Tottenham were desperate, they were hot to trot, and the managers were not.
Right, so you think after 55, nearly 60 days of no Antonio Conte, that they haven't spoken to anyone?
I'm sure they have, but I'm sure they'll make a decision when they think they're ready to do it, not when they've got a ticking egg timer from the media saying, well, we need to have this done because it won't look like
I heard they spoke to Luis Enrique and he thought he did a good job, but they didn't.
Well, there you are then. So there's a recharacterisation. So their view is there's an answer to your question.
I mean, how can Spurs turn down Luis Enrique?
Well, no, but that's not the way you framed it. You framed it, the conversation was all these guys are turning Spurs down. Now we're finding a different part of the conversation where Spurs are looking at top-end managers and going, no, thank you for us. So you don't know that wouldn't have been the case with these other guys. Nagelsmann is not a straight line. I mean, out Bayern Munich for a reason, difficult to manage, by having relationships with people in the media that are saying things about the internal workings of the football club they shouldn't be saying. All of these aren't perfect things. At the same time, as at a certain stage, what I think Spurs need, it's a really basic and a really obvious saying, what Daniel needs is someone that embodies Klopp. I don't just mean in the fact that he's producing outcomes now, because Klopp didn't produce outcomes at Liverpool for 2.5 years. He got away with a $64 million ivory smuggling smile, right? Because everyone liked him, and then eventually they won. But what he did was he brought the fans with him. He accepted the fact that Liverpool didn't have inordinate amounts of money. They had to sell players to buy players. He accepted all that. He bought into it and he built a team on the back of it. And the fans came with him. And all of a sudden there wasn't an issue with FSG. FSG were the perfect owners. And Daniel needs someone like that. Now, if you get a 35-year Nagelsmann in there, that's not learnt the way to manage up, not learnt the way to be able to understand the mechanics of a football club, you might find yourself in a hotbed of trouble.
But you've got a 57-year-old who's coming in, or could possibly come in once they finish the job with Celtic. Would he fit the profile of what Tottenham wanted when they first issued the brief after parting company with Antonio
Well, I don't know
Conte?
what the brief was.
So a young, exciting, up-and-coming.
Was that what their brief was?
Yeah.
That was their brief. They made it age sensitive, did they? I'll be bloody amazed if Daniel pigeonholed
Levy said it in his statement.
Okay, well, that makes it age sensitive, which means you're only going to go to one certain type of manager. It depends what you consider young. If you consider young by the nature of Roy Hodgson or by the nature of Sam Allardyce, then by definition he's going for a young manager.
We can manipulate it however you like.
Well, that's my point.
If we compare it to the King, he's pretty young.
Yeah, absolutely. He's a little baby. But I don't think it's an age-sensitive thing. I think it's the right manager. I think it's the right person to bring you to a point where you're absolutely doing what you need to do. Now, I don't know. I mean, if there is a view, if the view amongst the management fraternity is they don't want to work for Daniel Levy, then you'd be right, and the Spurs fans would be right, and Daniel Levy is the problem. But Daniel Levy is part of the problem until he affects the solution, isn't he?
I can tell you some breaking news. According to talkSPORT sources this morning, Celtic are bracing themselves for the departure of Ange Postecoglou, with Spurs expected to step up their interest in the Antipodean.
Well, what do you think to it then, Sam?
After this weekend's
What do you think
Scottish
to it?
FA Cup
Rather than
final.
ask me and put me on the spot, tell me what you think of the Ange Postecoglou
Do you know what
scenario.
I think? In truth, I think they've bungled the situation at the end of the season with Tottenham, because I think if you dismiss a manager or allow a manager to leave at that stage of the season when top four was still a realistic option for you, I think that you've basically negligently turned down the opportunity to qualify for Europe, because they were in pole positions to finish in the top four places, or at least the top six, and they haven't done that because they didn't appoint someone when...
But if you can't find somebody in that allotted time span, and I can tell you factually that there was no agenda from Daniel Levy. He wanted Conte to stay to the end of the summer. I sat at him with the Spurs Nottingham Forest game and go, why are you putting up with this fella? He said, because I don't want to provoke him. I'll leave him alone. I'll let him do what he wants, because I believe we're better off with him getting us to the top four. And then Conte decides, I'm not getting the rise. I'm not getting the reaction. I'm baiting the bear and I'm not getting a reaction. So I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll set the whole damn place on fire.
But you've just spoke to the fact that he's volatile and combustible, and they didn't want to poke him because he could end up walking away. But knowing that that was a possibility, I would have thought they had something in the back of their mind that if he did walk away, there would be a safe pair of hands to see them through to the end of the season. Well, not this. No, because they didn't have a plan either.
But the difficulty,
I don't think it's like Chelsea. Chelsea were just as bad.
The difficulty is that you've got at this moment in time a rarity in football. You've got more demand than you had supply. You couldn't find managers for Southampton. You couldn't find managers for Leeds. They were getting desperate. You couldn't find managers for Chelsea. And couldn't find managers for Tottenham, because people are looking at the football world slightly different from a management point of view. Yeah. And they'll take their time. And they won't take jobs in the middle of a season, especially high-profile jobs where they're going to be tainted by another guy's legacy. I don't think it's right, and I think they should be able to overcome it. But I think there's a lot more nuance to it.
And going back to what you've just said there, and I do think they bungled the replacement of Conte, and I do think they've missed out on Europe as a result of that, and that's cost them a lot in terms of their status and their European ambitions for next season. They won't be able to play in Europe next season. But I think after missing out on Slot, are never going to get Nagelsmann, Enrique, etc., etc. I actually believe that Ange Postecoglou is probably one of the best options that they could get. Postecoglou, I think Ruben Amorim at Sporting is a very good manager.
Is it a good option, or is it the way you're positioning it, which is, well, you're feeding in a certain pond, right? So it's the best you can get.
Well, they are feeding in a certain pond.
Outcome? Well,
they are. They're not in the top six now, are they? They're not a top six club anymore.
They will never be feeding in Chelsea's pond. No. They'll never be feeding in Man United's pond. They're unlikely to be feeding in Manchester City's pond. Yeah. So there's nothing wrong to some extent with the pond that Tottenham are fishing in. It's the same sort of pond as some of the other clubs that are in around the periphery of the top four will be fishing in, Newcastle included.
I think he improves them. But then again, that's not too difficult, is it, after what we've seen this season? Tottenham fans, what do you think about the inevitable move now, looks like, for Ange Postecoglou? 03717223344. That's the number to call if you want to give us your view. talkSPORT understanding that Celtic now bracing themselves for the departure of Tottenham target Ange Postecoglou. They're expected to step up their interest in him after this weekend's Scottish FA Cup final. We'll take more calls next.
Jim White and Simon Jordan. Monday to Friday mornings from 10 on AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.